There's a man frozen solid not 40 feet from where I'm sitting tonight. Been there since the winter of 1897, they say, though nobody's ever found him proper. The cold out here doesn't rot a body the way warm ground does. It keeps him, preserves him like a thing set aside for later. And the reason he's out there and I'm in here by this fire has nothing to do with luck and nothing to do with how tough either one of us was. It comes down to one thing he did that felt smart at the time and turned out to be the last mistake he ever made. I'll get to him, but first I want to tell you something that's going to sound wrong the moment it leaves my mouth, and I need you to sit with it anyway. The thing that kills most men out here in their first hard winter isn't the cold. It isn't the bear or the wolf or the fall through the ice. It's warmth. Being warm. Feeling warm. The pull toward getting warm and staying warm has laid more good men down in the snow than every predator in this country stacked together. I know how that sounds. A man freezes to death, and I'm telling you warmth killed him. Stay with me, because once you understand this, you'll never look at a cold night the same way again, and you might just carry it long enough to hand it to somebody who needs it. 9 out of 10 men living soft lives today would be dead before the first winter here was half over. That's not me being cruel. That's me being honest. And I'd rather be honest than kind if kind gets you killed. Most of you have never once in your lives been truly cold. Not the kind of cold I mean. You've been chilly walking from the car to the door. You've been uncomfortable waiting for the heater to catch. But you've never felt the cold that hunts you. The cold that has patience. The cold that sits down beside you and waits for you to make one wrong move. And here's the terrible part. When it finally comes for you, it doesn't feel like dying at all. It feels like the opposite. Let me tell you who I am so you know I'm not reading this off a card. I've wintered alone in high country where a man could walk 3 days in any direction and not cross another human track. I've had my beard freeze to my collar. I've watched the mercury drop so far down the glass that the numbers stopped mattering. And I've learned the old knowledge the only way it ever truly sticks, which is by nearly dying without it and living just barely long enough to understand why. The men who taught me the pieces of this didn't get them from books. They got them from burying partners. From coming across a cabin come spring with a man sitting frozen in his chair, stove cold, door wide open, boots off, coat off, and not a mark on him. Peaceful as you please. And that peaceful look is the whole horror of it. Here's the riddle I want you to hold on to, and I'm not going to explain it yet. I want it sitting in the back of your skull like a splinter until the end. How does a warm man freeze? Not a cold man, a warm man. A man who was warm, who felt warm, who by every account should have been fine, ends up stiff and blue in the morning while the fire beside him still holds a coal. I've seen it. The old hands saw it more times than they'd care to count, and every single one of those men would swear to you, if the dead could swear, that they were doing everything right. They were getting warm. They were staying warm. That was the problem. Keep it in mind. How does a warm man freeze? We'll come back to it, and when we do, it'll turn your stomach a little. Before any of that lands, you have to understand something about how the cold actually works on a body, because almost everything you think you know is backward. You picture freezing to death as a slow, obvious, dramatic thing, shivering harder and harder until you finally give out. And that's part of it, sure, the early part. But that's not the part that kills you. The shivering is your body being smart. The shivering is your body doing exactly what it should. A shivering man is a living man. It's when the shivering stops that you need to start being afraid. And by then, it's usually a man past being afraid of anything. The cold doesn't kill you by making you feel cold. It kills you by making you feel fine. It kills you by lying, the same way the lean meat lies to a starving man. And I've come to believe that the wilderness has only a handful of ways to end you, and every last one of them works by convincing you you're safe, right up until you're not. Now, the thing everybody gets wrong, the thing that puts men in the ground faster than any other single mistake, is this. They think the enemy is the air temperature. They think if they can just get the fire hot enough, the shelter warm enough, the coat thick enough, they've won. And so they pour everything they have into one thing. Heat. More heat. Bigger fire. And they miss the thing that's actually killing them, which is sitting right against their skin the whole time. It's wet. It's moisture. It's water. And most of the time, it's water that came out of their own body. That's the fix. And it's free, and it's the part nearly every man throws away without a second thought. The old hands had a saying for it, and it's about the truest thing anybody ever said about surviving the cold. You sweat, you die. 3 words. Say them to a modern man, and he'll look at you like you've lost your mind. Because everything in his life has taught him that sweating is what happens when you're too warm. And being too warm in winter sounds like a good problem to have. It is not a good problem. It's the problem that's going to kill 9 of you. I'm going to hand you this the way it was handed to me, in layers. Because if I dump it all at once, it loses its weight and you'll forget it by tomorrow. And I don't want you to forget it. I want it lodged in you. The first layer flips your whole understanding around, and here it is. You don't dress to stay warm. You dress to stay dry. And you manage your heat like it's the most dangerous thing you're carrying, because it is. A modern man's whole instinct is to fight the cold with warmth. Pile on the layers, stoke the fire, generate heat, hold heat. But the old hand does something that looks almost crazy from the outside. He's constantly, deliberately letting heat escape. He opens his coat when he starts working. He takes his hat off when he's splitting wood. He slows down when he feels himself getting hot. He would rather be a little cold and dry than warm and damp every single time, because he knows that the warmth is temporary and the damp is what kills you when the sun goes down. That's the reversal. Cold won't kill you if you're dry. Wet will kill you, even when it isn't all that cold. The most dangerous days out here aren't the coldest ones. They're the ones right around freezing, wet and windy, 35 degrees and raining. Because a man doesn't respect 35 degrees. He respects 20 below. He gears up for 20 below. 35 and wet slips right past him and takes him down, while he's still telling himself it isn't even that cold. The graveyard's full of men who died on days that weren't that cold. Now let me get to that frozen man out past the tree line, because his story is every part of this laid-out plain. He was a stampeder, one of the thousands who poured into this country chasing gold with more hope than sense. And by every account, he was strong, and he was determined, and he wanted it bad. And wanting it bad is exactly what killed him. He was crossing high country in the deep of winter, hauling his outfit. And he did the thing that feels like hard work and reads like virtue and is actually a death sentence. He pushed, he sweated, he worked himself hot inside all those clothes, hour after hour, and every drop of sweat that soaked into his wool was a drop of poison he was saving up for later. He would have felt strong doing it. He would have felt like he was winning. And when he finally stopped to rest, sat down in the snow to catch his wind, all that damp wool went cold against him faster than you'd believe, and the cold he'd been out running all day caught up with him all at once, and it settled in, and it did not leave. That's the trap the country sets. It rewards the exact behavior that kills you, right up until the bill comes due. Sit with that a moment, because it's the whole spine of what I'm telling you. The man didn't die from a lack of effort. He died from too much of it in the wrong way. He died working hard. And that's the cruelest joke the cold country plays. Because everything in a determined man screams at him to push harder when things get bad. And out here, pushing harder in the cold is one of the surest ways to end up like him, sitting stiff and blue in the snow while the sun comes up on a body that tried too hard to live. I want to be straight with you about who lived and who died out here, because it tells you everything about where the real knowledge sat. The native people of this country, who'd wintered on this land for more winters than anybody can count, didn't die this way. Not much, anyway. Because they understood moisture the way you understand not to touch a hot stove. Their clothing was built around it. The garments were loose where they needed to breathe, layered so they could be opened and shed and adjusted, made from furs and hides chosen specifically because they'd handle sweat and wet and still keep a body alive. They knew you traveled slow in the cold. They knew you rested before you got tired. They knew 100 small things about staying dry that the newcomers never learned. And the newcomers, the stampeders and the trappers and the settlers who came pouring in, they had wool and grit and determination and almost none of the knowing. They copied the surface. They saw people surviving out here and figured surviving was mostly about being tough. So they were tough. They pushed hard, they worked through it, they gutted it out. And a great many of them died with that toughness still on their faces. Because toughness without knowing is just a faster way to sweat yourself to death. That's the divide. And it's the same divide as the lean meat. The same divide is almost everything out here. One group carried the wisdom in their bones. The other group carried the tools and thought the tools were enough. The tools are never enough. The knowing is the thing. Hold on to all of this. The sweat and the damp and the warm man who froze. Because the second layer is where most of you are going to realize you've been doing it wrong your entire life. And I'll get to it. But first, I need you to really feel how quiet this killer is. There's no drama to it. There's no moment where a horn sounds and you know the fight is on. It comes in so slow and so gentle that by the time you understand what's happening to you, the part of your mind that could have saved you is already going dim. That's what makes it different from every danger you've ever known. A bear, you'd fight. A fall, you'd feel. This one just talks you softly to sleep, and the words it uses are, "I'm fine," and "I'll rest here just a minute," and "It's not even that cold." And I need you to understand that every man who ever died this way believed those words right up to the end, and believed them because his own body was telling them to him. Your body will betray you out here. That's the thing nobody warns you about. Your own body, the thing you've trusted your whole life to tell you the truth about how you're doing, will lie to your face when the cold gets into it. And it'll lie sweetest right at the moment the lie can kill you. So keep the riddle burning. How does a warm man freeze? You're closer to the answer than you know. And when I lay it out for you plain, it's going to change the way you think about being warm for the rest of your life. Because the warmth that man felt at the end wasn't the good kind. It was the last kind. And there's a difference between those two that the old hands would have staked their lives on, and did. And some of them lost that bet. And I knew a few of the ones who won it, and lived to tell me how close it was. Stay with me. The worst of it is still coming, and so is the part that saves you, and it costs nothing at all. The second layer is the one that's going to make some of you angry, because it means the way you've dressed for the cold your whole life has been quietly working against you. Here it is. The material against your skin matters more than all the warmth piled on top of it, and the thing most people wear is the exact thing that kills. Cotton. That soft, comfortable, familiar cotton that makes up most of what hangs in your closet. The old hands had a name for it out here, and they didn't say it kindly. They called it death cloth. Cotton kills. They'd tell a greenhorn that flat, And the greenhorn would laugh. Because how's a cotton shirt going to kill anybody? Here's how. Cotton drinks water, and it will not let it go. It soaks up your sweat. It soaks up the snow. It soaks up the damp out of the very air. And once it's wet, it holds that wet against your skin like a cold poultice, and it pulls the heat straight out of you. Faster wet than dry by a mile. A wet cotton shirt against your chest on a cold night is a machine built for one purpose, and that purpose is to cool your blood. The old hands wore wool, and they wore it for one reason above all others. Wool keeps a good part of its warmth even soaking wet. You can wring wool out and put it back on, and it'll still hold a coal of heat against you. And cotton, wet, is just cold rag. That's the second layer, and it's the part the modern man throws away. Throws away every time he pulls on a cotton hoodie to go out in the snow, because it's soft and it's what he owns. And nobody ever told him the soft thing is the thing that'll leave him blue in a ditch. The third layer feels like cheating once you learn it, and it's this. You don't wear your warmth all at once. You carry it, and you spend it in pieces. Layers. Not one big coat, but many small ones you can open and close, and add and shed as fast as your body's heat changes. The whole secret of it is that your heat is a fire you're tending all day long, and a fire needs adjusting. And a man in one thick coat has no way to adjust his fire. He's either roaring hot and sweating, or he's stopped and freezing, nothing in between. But the man in layers is working his vents all day like a stove. He feels himself heating up, climbing a slope. So he opens his front, pulls off his hat, sheds a layer before the sweat starts. He crests the hill and the wind hits, and he's cooling too fast. So he closes up, puts the layer back, seals his heat in. He never lets himself soak, and he never lets himself freeze. He rides that narrow line between the two all day long. And that narrow line is exactly where a man survives. The greenhorn thinks staying warm is about how much you own. The old hand knows it's about how fast you can change. And here's the piece that really feels like cheating. The single most useful thing you can do to control your whole body's heat is put on or take off your hat and your gloves, because you lose an enormous share of your heat through your head and your hands. And that means your hat is a throttle. Getting too hot on the trail. Take the hat off and dump heat fast before the sweat starts. Cooling down at rest. Put it back on and hold it in. That one small thing, that scrap of wool most men treat as an afterthought, is one of the most powerful tools you own out here. And it costs nothing, and weighs nothing, and lives in your pocket. The fourth layer is the one that sounds like madness. The one every instinct in you fights. And it's the same shape as the last video's hardest truth. When the cold is bad and you're working hard, you do less, not more. You slow down. You stop before you're tired. You rest before you need to. Everything in a cold, scared, determined man screams at him to hurry, to push, to work harder and get it done and get to safety. And that instinct is the frozen man in the snow. That instinct is what soaks your clothes and empties your reserves and leaves you nothing for the long, cold night when you'll actually need it. The old hand moves through the winter woods slow. Slower than looks right. Slower than feels productive. He'd rather take twice as long and arrive dry than move fast and arrive soaked. He knows that out here, the race doesn't go to the swift. It goes to the one who never broke a sweat. And I mean that as plain fact and not a figure of speech. Do less. Move slow. Save your fire for the dark. It sounds like laziness, and it's the discipline that keeps you breathing. Now circle back. That riddle I planted. How does a warm man freeze? Here's the whole of it laid out plain. And it's going to make the frozen man's story finally make sense. When you work hard in the cold, you sweat. That sweat soaks your clothes, especially if they're cotton. And even wool will damp through if you push hard enough, long enough. Now you've got wet cloth against warm skin. And as long as you keep working, keep generating heat, you feel fine. Better than fine. You feel warm, strong, capable. That's the warm man. But the moment you stop, the moment you sit down to rest, the heat engine shuts off, and all that wet cloth goes from a warm damp to a cold wet in minutes. And now it's doing the cotton kills thing, pulling heat out of your core faster than your resting body can make it. Your temperature starts to slide. And here's the terrible turn. As your core cools past a certain point, your body does something that has killed more men than almost anything else out here. It opens the blood vessels near your skin, and a great rush of warm blood floods out to your surface. And for one moment, you feel flushed, hot, burning up. And men in that state have been known to do the maddest thing imaginable. They tear off their clothes. They strip down in the snow because they feel like they're on fire. And they call it the last dance, the undressing. And searchers find them that way, clothes scattered, dead in the drift, and to the untrained eye it makes no sense at all. But now you know. The warmth that man felt at the very end was his own body dumping its last heat out through his skin. The final betrayal. The sweetest and deadliest lie the cold ever tells. He froze because he got warm. That's the answer to the riddle. The warmth was the dying. You're probably wondering why nobody ever told you any of this. And the answer's the same quiet answer as always. And it's got nothing to do with any conspiracy. It's convenience and money and time. A piece of survival knowledge only lives as long as people need it. And the day the furnace came on and stayed on, the day a man could walk from a heated house to a heated car to a heated store and never once be truly cold, the knowing started slipping away. Nobody keeps a rule they'll never have to use. And then it got worse. And this is the part that ought to sit you up straight. The modern world took the old truth and flipped it clean over and sold it back to you. Walk into any store and everything on the rack is built around one idea: staying warm. Warmth is the whole pitch. Warmer, cozier, thicker. And they'll happily sell you a big soft cotton thing that feels wonderful in the store and will drink your sweat and hold it cold against your skin the first time you actually work in it. There's no money in telling you the truth, which is dull and free and sounds like nothing. Stay dry. Move slow. Wear wool. Open your coat before you sweat. You can't put that on a label and charge for it, so they sell you warmth. And warmth feels like the answer. And warmth is exactly the thing that killed the man in the snow. It's not a cover-up. It's just the quiet arithmetic of what sells. And the true thing got crowded out because there was never a dollar in it. Let me be straight with you the way I'd want a man to be straight with me, because I'd rather you trust me than be impressed. This probably won't happen to most of you, because you're not going to be caught out in high country in February with wet wool and no fire. You've got a furnace and a phone and a road. But I'll tell you the same thing I told you about the rabbits. Every man this ever came for figured the same thing, right up to the minute it had him. And this one reaches into ordinary life further than you'd think. Men die of it on hunting trips a mile from the truck. Men die of it on a wet fall hike gone long. Men die of it sitting in a stranded car. It doesn't need the deep wilderness. It just needs you, wet and cool and sure you're fine. Here's how you carry the whole of it, small enough to hold. Stay dry before you stay warm, because dry is what keeps you alive, and warm is just how you feel. Never wear cotton against your skin in the cold. Wear wool that holds its heat when it's wet. Dress in layers you can open and shed and close, and work your hat and your coat like the throttle on a stove all day long, dumping heat before you sweat and sealing it in when you stop. And above all, move slow, slower than feels right. Rest before you're tired, stop before you're soaked. Save your fire for the long dark when you'll truly need it. Do that much, and this country can throw its hardest winter straight at you, and you'll walk out come spring. And maybe that's the real lesson, the one bigger than sweat and wool and winter. The man in the snow didn't die because the cold was cruel. The cold was only ever just the cold. He died because he was sure. Sure that working hard was the same as doing right. Sure that feeling warm meant being safe. Sure his own body would tell him the truth. The wilderness never kills the humble man half as fast as it kills the sure one. And the old hands feared their own certainty more than they ever feared the cold, which is the thing I'd hand you ahead of any trick. So tell me, down in the comments, what's the one piece of cold weather wisdom somebody in your family carried, a grandfather, an old uncle, that the rest of us have plain forgotten? Because I want to hear it. Next time, I'm going to hand you another one that runs dead against everything you've been told. An old rule about fire, of all things, that sounds backward until you understand it. How the biggest, brightest, warmest fire a man can build is often the very fire that leaves him coldest by morning. And what the old hands built instead. Until then, take care of your fire. And don't ever trust a warm feeling to tell you you're safe.